There is a record buried in the English Exchequer Rolls, a financial document most people have never heard of. It logs a payment made on August 3, 1305. The payment went to a man named Sir John Menteith. What he received was land valued at £100 per year. What he gave in return was a man he had shared dinner with the night before. There was wine at that dinner. The wine tasted wrong. He didn't listen. On August 23, 1305, a man was dragged face down through the streets of London for nearly 4 miles. Naked. Bound to a wooden frame. Cobblestones tearing against open flesh. His back stopped being skinned somewhere around the first mile. By the second, muscle was visible. By the third, bone. He arrived at Smithfield with his face shattered, nose broken, eyes swollen completely shut, teeth gone. Then the executioner stepped forward. What followed lasted over an hour. It involved 7 separate tools, 3 changes of blade, and a medical reality that not a single person in that crowd understood. That reality is the reason he stayed conscious through all of it. But here is what almost nobody tells you about this execution. It was illegal. Not by modern standards. By the legal standards of 1305 itself. The charge used to justify it was treason. And treason required one specific condition. An oath of loyalty to the English crown. William Wallace never swore that oath. Not once. Not ever. Edward I knew this. His lawyers knew this. So they invented something else. A secondary charge so thin that even the court scribes who recorded it seemed uncomfortable writing it down. I'll get to that charge, and why it still matters. But first you need to understand who Wallace was before London. Because the man they killed was not the man they were expecting. And when the execution was over, when the head was tarred and spiked above London Bridge, when the 4 quarters were sealed in barrels and shipped to 4 different cities, something began happening at those display sites that Edward had not planned for. Something that made his intelligence network send urgent reports back to Westminster. People were leaving offerings in the dark. Wallace's uncle was a priest at Junipace. He educated the boy. Latin, French, English, Scots. 4 languages. In an era when most men of his rank could not write their own names, William Wallace could read legal documents, compose correspondence, and argue theology in the language of the Vatican. That matters not because it made him a scholar, but because it meant that when he stood in Westminster Hall in August 1305 and spoke 7 words in Latin to his judges, he knew exactly what those words meant legally. And so did they. He was born around 1270 in Elderslie, Renfrewshire. His father was Sir Malcolm Wallace. Not a peasant, not a lord, a minor landowner. Enough property to eat, enough standing to matter locally, not enough to matter to anyone in London or Edinburgh. For 27 years, nothing happened. He lived. He worked. He would have died unknown, just another name swallowed by history's background noise. 2 things changed that. The first was a king. The second was a woman. William Heselrigg was the English sheriff of Lanark. An enforcer. When Wallace refused to submit to English authority, Heselrigg took the one thing Wallace could not replace. Marion Braidfute. Wallace's wife. Heselrigg killed her. The chronicles don't record how. They record what came next. May 1297. Middle of the night. Wallace gathered 30 men. Not soldiers. Men who had lost something to the English garrison. Men whose threshold had been crossed. They entered Lanark in darkness, found the sheriff's quarters, broke through the door. Wallace killed Heselrigg personally. Close range. The kind of violence that leaves a room unrecognizable. Chronicles describe what was left of the sheriff as pieces. Then they turned on the garrison. 240 English soldiers. Barracks set alight. Doors barred from the outside. Men burned alive. Others cut down running from the flames. By sunrise, Lanark's English garrison had ceased to exist. Scotland woke up with a new problem. England woke up with something worse. A man with nothing left to lose. To understand why English soldiers were stationed across Scotland in the first place, you need to understand Edward I. 6'2" in an era when most men barely reached 5.5 feet. They called him Longshanks. He had invaded Scotland, declared himself its overlord, and forced every Scottish noble to sign an oath of loyalty. The ragman rolls. Hundreds of signatures. Hundreds of men who bent the knee because the alternative was losing everything. Then he took the Stone of Destiny, Scotland's coronation stone, and dragged it to Westminster, installed it beneath his own throne, so every Scottish lord who came to pay homage would kneel above the symbol of their own sovereignty, placed directly under the body of an English king. The Scots started calling their exiled king John Balliol by a nickname. Tomb Tabard. Empty coat. A man wearing a title with nothing inside it. Every major Scottish town had an English garrison, an English sheriff, English tax collectors, English law. Wallace didn't care about thrones. Didn't care about the wounded pride of nobles who had surrendered their signatures to protect their estates. He had cared about one woman. And now she was dead. 4 months after Lanark, September 11th, 1297, Wallace stood on the north bank of the River Forth and watched 10,000 English soldiers begin crossing a narrow wooden bridge. The bridge was barely wide enough for 2 horsemen riding abreast. The English commander, the Earl of Surrey, had not bothered scouting alternate crossing points. He didn't need to. He had heavy cavalry, longbowmen, the most feared professional army in Europe. They had crushed Wales. They had ended every rebellion they had ever faced. Wallace had 3,000 men. Farmers. Merchants. Men holding weapons they had picked up because there was nothing else left to hold. He waited. The English crossed, hundreds at a time, slowly, the bridge bottlenecking their advance. Wallace waited until exactly half the army was across. 10,000 men split perfectly in two by a wooden bridge over a river. Then he gave the order. 2 hours later, 5,000 English soldiers were dead. The River Forth ran red for days. Among the dead was Hugh Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland, a man so despised that after the battle the Scots skinned his body and made belts from the leather. Wallace reportedly kept a strip of Cressingham's skin as a sword belt. The Scottish nobles, the same ones who had signed Edward's oaths, who had bent the knee, named Wallace Guardian of Scotland. A commoner. A minor landowner's son given a title that had only ever gone to earls and lords. For 1 year, William Wallace ruled Scotland. Then Edward came himself. July 22nd, 1298. Falkirk. Edward brought 25,000 men. The full weight of English military power deployed against a single country. Wallace had maybe 7,000, mostly infantry, few cavalry, no longbowmen. English arrows tore through the Scottish formations. Thousands dead in the first hour. Wallace tried to hold. Couldn't. Falkirk was a massacre. His army shattered. But here is the thing about Falkirk that separates Wallace from every other medieval commander who lost a major battle. He didn't surrender. Didn't send envoys. Didn't negotiate. He disappeared. 7 years. 1298 to 1305. Wallace became smoke. English supply trains moving through the forests south of Stirling would arrive at their destinations lighter than when they had left. Wagons emptied overnight. Guards found dead at their posts with no alarm raised. Entire convoys vanished into glens that English maps didn't mark. In one recorded incident, an English patrol of 40 men entered the Ettrick Forest tracking Wallace's trail. They followed boot prints, broken branches, cold campfire ash. The trail led deeper, narrower, trees closing overhead. 3 men came back. They reported that the forest itself had attacked them. Arrows from positions they couldn't see. Rocks from above. Then silence. Then more arrows. The other 37 were never recovered. Edward spent over £100,000 hunting him. In modern terms, somewhere above 80 million. He mobilized armies, built spy networks, offered bounties, imprisoned the families of suspected sympathizers. Wallace kept moving. By 1305, Scotland was broken. Most of the nobility had surrendered again, signed new oaths, accepted English rule in exchange for keeping their lands. They had done the math. Survival beat principle. Wallace never did that math. He was the last one. The last man who refused to call Edward king. And that was the problem. Not because he was dangerous militarily. By 1305 his fighting force was negligible. The problem was what he represented. As long as Wallace existed, the surrender of every Scottish noble looked like what it was. A choice. A choice to comply. And if one man could choose differently, then every man who hadn't was making a statement about himself. Edward could not allow that comparison to exist. He built an intelligence network across Scotland the way a spider builds a web. Tavern keepers on the English payroll. Merchants reporting travellers. Priests passing information through confessionals. Servants listening at doors. The exchequer rolls show payments to informants. Silver exchanged for whispers about Wallace's location. And Edward made the stakes explicit. Anyone caught helping Wallace would die the same way Wallace would die. Your family would lose everything. Your name would be erased. One by one, the circle collapsed. By mid-1305, maybe 10 people in all of Scotland could still be trusted. Maybe fewer. One of those trusted people was Sir John Menteith, a Scottish knight. He had fought against the English, hosted Wallace at his properties, shared meals with him. The kind of relationship that looks like loyalty until you see the payment records. August 3rd, 1305. Wallace was staying at a property just outside Glasgow. Menteith knew he would be there. So did Jack Short, Wallace's own servant. So did two others whose names were deliberately obscured by those who survived. They invited Wallace to dinner. Wine was served. Some chronicles suggest it was drugged. Not enough to kill. Enough to slow reflexes. Make him drowsy. He closed his eyes in what he believed was safety, among people he trusted with his life. He woke to armor, chains, cold iron around his wrists, and faces he recognized. Men he had eaten with. Men he had believed would die before they would turn. The wine had tasted wrong. He hadn't listened. They didn't take him straight to England. That would have been efficient. Edward didn't want efficient. For 17 days, Wallace was transported south in an iron cage mounted on a cart, displayed in Scottish towns. They stopped deliberately. Made it a tour. Every major population centre on the route was given time to see their hero in chains. The purpose was specific. They wanted the hope to die before the man did. They wanted every Scot who had ever whispered Wallace's name to see what that name looked like in irons. 17 days to think about what waited at the end of the road. August 22nd, 1305. Evening. London. 80,000 people. The largest city Wallace had ever seen. They housed him at a residence in Fenchurch Street. 20 men at arms stood guard outside. Wallace refused food that night. Spent the hours in prayer. Latin through the door. He asked for a priest. None was provided. Morning came. They dressed him in sackcloth, mounted him on a deliberately inferior horse. Around him rode the Mayor of London, 2 sheriffs, 6 aldermen, 20 knights, all on war horses. 2.5 miles to Westminster. 90 minutes. Thousands lining the streets. Rotten food, stones, filth thrown from the crowd. Wallace said nothing. Westminster Hall. 240 feet long, built in 1097. A wooden platform stood 4 feet high at the south end. 5 judges in scarlet robes, Sir Peter Mallory at the centre. As Wallace was brought to the platform, they placed a crown on his head. Oak leaves and laurel twisted into a wreath. The English claimed Wallace had once boasted he deserved to wear a crown at Westminster. No Scottish source confirms this. It was performance. Mallory read the charges. Treason. Sedition. Murder without regard to age or sex. Robbery. Arson. The killing at Stirling Bridge. Burning of churches. Invasion of northern England. Acting as guardian without authority. 15 minutes of accusations. When Mallory finished, Wallace spoke. First in Latin, then in English. 7 words. I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. Under English law, treason meant breaking an oath of loyalty to your sovereign. Wallace had never sworn loyalty to Edward. He had fought for Scotland's lawful king, John Balliol, for Scottish sovereignty. Legally, by England's own statutes, he could not be guilty of treason. Edward knew this. His lawyers knew this. So they added a fabricated charge that Wallace had attempted to make himself King of Scotland. No evidence exists for this claim. None. It was invented to plug a legal hole. The trial lasted under 30 minutes. Wallace was given no right of defense. His words were recorded, then dismissed. Mallory pronounced the sentence. Drawn to Smithfield. Hanged by the neck but not until dead. Cut down while living. Emasculated. Disemboweled. His organs burned before his eyes. Then beheaded. His body quartered. Head to London Bridge. Quarters to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. The first fully documented execution by hanging, drawing, and quartering. It would remain the legal standard for high treason in England for the next 500 years. The last person to receive this sentence died in 1820. Guards seized Wallace in Westminster Hall, stripped him in front of hundreds, dragged him outside to the hurdle. A wooden frame, 8 feet by 4, covered in oxide. They threw him face down, tied his arms wide, legs spread, rope at wrists and ankles. A wooden beam was positioned under his chest. That beam was not accidental. It kept his face from dragging flat against the ground, prevented suffocation, kept his head elevated enough that the cobblestones wouldn't knock him unconscious too quickly. They wanted him awake. 2 draft horses. Westminster to Smithfield. 3.8 miles through the most populated sections of London. King Street, the Strand, Fleet Street, Ludgate Hill. 2 hours at walking pace. 2 hours face down, naked, dragged across stone. Modern forensic analysis of identical execution methods documents what happened to the body. First 100 yards, friction burns, abrasion. Quarter mile, the outer skin layer is gone. Bleeding starts. 1 mile, muscle tissue becomes visible. 2 miles, bone shows through the deepest wounds. Human skin holds roughly 200 nerve endings per square centimeter. The victim stays conscious. No severe head trauma. No rapid blood loss. Just sustained neurological overload that the body cannot shut down. 10 to 15,000 people lined the route. Objects thrown. Screaming. Some sections fell silent, possibly sympathizers, possibly something else. Street vendors followed the procession selling refreshments. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders. One monk's chronicle records it plainly. His back was flayed to the bone in places. Yet he spoke no word of plea. Behind him on the cobblestones, a dark trail 4 miles long. 11:30 in the morning. Smithfield. 10 acres. London's execution ground since 1196. The scaffold stood 8 feet high, 20 feet wide. Gallows at the center. Tools visible. A brazier glowing. Quartering block. Ropes. Chains. Knives laid out in sequence. 5 to 8,000 people. Temporary grandstands had been built for the wealthy. 2 pence per seat. They hauled Wallace up the scaffold stairs. His back destroyed. Face broken. Nose shattered. Eyes swollen shut. Teeth missing. Blood on every step. Still breathing. The executioner stepped forward. Hooded. Black robes. John Dalton, London's chief headsman. 3 assistants beside him. The tools laid out where Wallace could see them, where the crowd could see them. This was choreography. You showed the condemned what was coming. Let their imagination work alongside the instruments. The noose was hemp rope, 1.5 inches thick. The knot positioned behind his left ear, not the throat. That placement compressed the carotid artery and jugular on one side. It caused strangulation, not a broken neck. A broken neck takes seconds. Strangulation takes minutes. 2 assistants pulled the rope. Wallace lifted 18 inches off the scaffold. Not high enough to snap the neck. Just high enough to cut off air. His body fought. Legs kicking. Torso twisting. Face turning red, then purple, then dark purple. Capillaries bursting. Tongue swelling. Foam at the lips, eyes bulging. 2 to 3 minutes. Conscious for most of it. The executioner watched, timing it. Too long and Wallace dies. The execution is ruined. Too short, and he recovers too quickly. 2.5 minutes was the practiced interval. John Dalton earned 20 shillings for that precision. The signal came. They cut the rope. Wallace dropped 2 feet onto the scaffold. Hit hard. Stillness, then violent gasping, his crushed windpipe pulling at air, wet, choking, blood-tinged. Body convulsing. They let him recover. 2 minutes. 3. Just enough for his brain to register that he was still alive. Then they moved him to the table. 7 feet long. 3 feet wide. Tilted at 15 degrees so the crowd could see. Iron manacles at wrists, ankles, waist. A leather strap across his forehead to keep his head still. To keep him from looking away. Because they wanted him to watch. Here is the medical detail that changes everything you are about to hear. Modern trauma medicine confirms that consciousness could be retained through everything that followed. The table's tilt maintained blood pressure to the brain. Staged removal of organs prevented rapid hemorrhage. Adrenaline at maximum output. Shock does not mean unconsciousness. It means every nerve in the body is firing at once. Medieval executioners didn't know why their methods worked. They only knew that the condemned stayed awake longer when the table was tilted. Wallace was awake. What came next lasted 15 minutes. The emasculation was staged, prolonged, held up for the crowd at each stage, thrown piece by piece into the brazier. The smell of burning flesh reached the grandstands. Several people vomited. Then the abdomen. A 12-inch incision from the sternum downward through skin, fat, muscle. The calibration was everything. Too deep and he bleeds out. Too shallow and the organs cannot be extracted. This balance took years of practice to learn. The executioner parted the wound. Inside, intestines, stomach, liver, visible, pulsing. Wallace's head was strapped down. His eyes were forward. He was watching his own body being opened. 20 feet of small intestine extracted slowly. Thrown into the brazier in coils. The burning of intestines, blood, flesh. The city had provided herb bundles to mask the smell. This expense is documented in the city's own records. One chronicler wrote that Wallace called out in Latin, "In manus tuas, Domin. Into your hands, Lord." The evisceration continued. Stomach, liver, spleen, kidneys. The executioner's arms bloody to the elbows. 10 to 15 minutes of extraction. The crowd shifted. The initial noise became silence. People left. Parents covered children's eyes. Too late. Women fainted. Soldiers vomited. Public executions were common in London. Hangings lasted 5 to 10 minutes. This had gone over an hour. The brazier sat directly in Wallace's sightline. He was watching his own organs burn. Wallace's state was unclear by this point. Likely shock-induced semi-consciousness. Eyes rolling back. Shallow breathing. The executioner assessed. The man was fading. Time to finish. Tool change. Knives to a heavy axe. 5-pound head. 3-foot handle. Broad blade honed specifically for this execution. They dragged him to the chopping block. The executioner raised the axe. The first blow missed clean. Wallace's neck muscles had contracted. His body moved. Deep wound. Partial severing. Blood across the scaffold. Wallace's body convulsed. The crowd gasped. 3 seconds later, the second blow. The head separated. The executioner grasped it by the hair and raised it high. Behold the head of a traitor. He turned to all 4 corners, showed every section of the crowd. Time of death recorded at 12:47 in the afternoon. The execution had begun around 11:30 in the morning. Total time, 1 hour and 17 minutes. Then came the quartering. The assistants took over. Arms at the shoulders. Legs at the hips. Torso split down the spine. 7 pieces, each cleaned, wrapped in cloth, salted for preservation, packed in barrels, sealed with tar. The scaffold was washed. Court scribes recorded every detail. Execution expenses totaled 26 shillings and 14 pence, documented in the pipe rolls. Edward wanted a receipt. Wallace's head was parboiled, submerged in water with bay leaves and salt for 15 to 20 minutes, enough to halt decomposition, then dipped in pine tar. An 18-inch iron spike driven through the base of the skull. Installed on London Bridge's southern gatehouse at the highest point visible from both banks of the Thames. It joined approximately 30 other heads already displayed there. 2 guards were assigned permanently to prevent theft. Sympathizers stealing heads from the bridge was common enough to require dedicated security. The head remained until the bridge was renovated in the 1390s. Possibly 85 years. The quarters went on their own journeys. Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, Perth. Every major population centre in Scotland would see a piece of him. Edward's strategy was geometric. A web of flesh across the country. A constant rotting reminder. But here is what Edward miscalculated. The quarters became pilgrimage sites. Scots travelled roads patrolled by English soldiers to reach them. Not in fear. English guards began reporting mysterious offerings appearing near the displays overnight. Flowers. Ribbons. Despite strict prohibitions. Despite the fact that being caught meant the same death Wallace had suffered. His dead body was doing what his living presence had done. Within months, Scottish minstrels composed songs about the execution. Raw, angry laments that turned English cruelty into Scottish determination. The English made singing about Wallace a punishable offence. The songs went underground. They got darker, more popular. English soldiers who had witnessed the execution began spreading a different account in barracks and taverns. They had expected to watch something break. Instead, they had watched a man endure what should have broken anything. And the man had not cooperated with the narrative. These accounts became their own kind of song. The Scottish Church embraced him. Priests who had previously urged accommodation with England began preaching sermons drawing parallels between Wallace's suffering and the Passion of Christ. Robert the Bruce, who had previously collaborated with the English, who had helped hunt Wallace, raised the standard of rebellion less than a year later. When asked why he would risk the same fate, the response attributed to him was simple. He would rather die like Wallace than live as Edward's property. Edward I died in 1307, 2 years after the execution. Still fighting Scottish rebels. His conquest of Scotland incomplete. On his deathbed, he reportedly ordered his bones carried with English armies until Scotland was fully subdued. His son Edward II lacked his father's will. The Scottish resistance that Wallace had started, and that his death had energized, triumphed at Bannockburn in 1314. 700 years later, Wallace's name still carries weight. Not because of what he accomplished in life, though that was considerable. Because of how he died. Edward tried to destroy a man so completely that even the memory would disappear. He used the full machinery of English law and English cruelty to erase a person from existence. Body. Legacy. The very idea he represented. Instead, he created a legend that outlived the English medieval monarchy itself. The execution designed to terrify became the reason people stopped being afraid. Wallace's 7 words at trial, words he knew the legal weight of because a priest in Junipace had taught a landowner's son to read Latin, still carry their original force 8 centuries later. I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. Legitimate authority requires consent. The broken body proves something Edward never accounted for. Sometimes the destruction is the message, and the message outlasts the destroyers. That was August 23rd, 1305. If this reached you, if it made you feel something, consider leaving a like and subscribing to Crimson Archive. There is a great deal more history waiting here. History that most people never get told.